Professor Howard Williams takes you on a journey through time and space, exploring death and memory, past and present. Archaeodeath.
Okay, I'm out on my lockdown government sanctioned exercise and I thought I'd come and do another video, and here I am at the Church of St Paul's in Pentre Broughton, which is a few miles from my home. And in this location I want to talk to you about another of my past publications and use this as an appropriate setting, because this late 19th century mining and steelworkers community on the hill here at Pentre Broughton, close to the Brumbo Steelworks, close to the Westminster Colliery, has its church situated within an Iron Age hill fort. So Brynigaya is the name, and actually behind the camera on the edge of the churchyard boundary you can still see the rampart of the Iron Age hill fort. So this is a, as I pitched it to my kids for the morning walk purposes, a creepy graveyard on a hidden hill fort. So this is the creepy graveyard on the hidden hill fort. It's not very creepy. It's a lovely churchyard, and it has got the cemetery, the local authority cemetery, is extended from it, with some very modern graves, graves from this month indeed. But we come to the oldest part of the churchyard, into the 19th century graveyard, right the way down near the Iron Age hill fort boundary. So we have a community of over 150 years who are living within and also burying within an Iron Age hill fort. And it may not be creepy, but the hill fort is indeed hidden, and I suspect many people aren't aware of its presence, and indeed it's very difficult to apprehend. But as along the line of the ramparts on the eastern side, it's on the edge of cliffs and the churchyard boundary respects it. On the western side, it's overrun by housing, and the same on the south and the north. Now, why is that an appropriate location to talk about a past publication of mine? Well, one of the themes of my research past has been the reuse of prehistoric sites, and how people, by happenstance or by decision, decide to reoccupy far older sites as places of habitation, but also places to conduct their ceremonies and to bury the dead. And often these juxtapositions have been seen as coincidental, and often they actually are, but as a pattern, as a phenomenon that tells us about the story of the place, they are an important part of the archaeologist's sort of story. We should be not just looking at one phase of when things were constructed, but their biographies. And from that perspective, it's an important aspect of understanding the history of communities, the history of place, to see them in relation to a broader histories of use and reuse. And for the other reason is that actually often these cemeteries are deliberately reused and redeployed, and the association with an ancient site may hold deep significance for particular communities at particular times in later centuries. And in that context, I want to introduce you to my first edited journal collection, The Past in the Past, the Reuse of Ancient Monuments. It was a special issue of the Routledge-produced journal World Archaeology, and Richard Bradley was the editor of this volume, but he had a bit of a problem because he didn't have any papers or indeed a theme for his edited collection. Each volume of World Archaeology then, as mainly now, has a special theme, and he had the theme in mind, but he didn't have a way of populating the journal with articles. And so he called on me because I had organised a theoretical archaeology group session on this very theme of the past in the past, the reuse of ancient monuments. And so I co-edited it with him, included one of my own journal articles, my second journal article, peer-reviewed journal article, and in addition to that he drew upon the speakers in my conference session to produce this volume. And indeed within the volume, the front cover is a photograph of the Taplow burial mound in Buckinghamshire, an Anglo-Saxon princely grave that reused, in its location, reused within a Iron Age hill fort. So that's why it's appropriate to be here at Pentre Broughton today. So that in itself later developed as a Christian churchyard within the Iron Age hill fort at Taplow. Now, within the book there are a whole series of papers There is a paper called Prehistoric Histories by Chris Gosden and Gary Locke that looks at the biography of landscape, the different tempos of use and reuse within the Berkshire Ridgeway zone in southern Oxfordshire now, historically in Berkshire. We have a paper by Richard Bradley on ruined buildings, ruined stones, looking at how perhaps some natural places or natural outcrops were perceived in prehistory as places built by previous generations, ancestors, or deities. Cornelius Holtorf provides a chapter on the life histories of megaliths in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern in Germany. So he looks at the biographies from prehistory to the present of megalithic monuments. Sturt Manning looks at changing past and socio-political cognition in late Bronze Age Cyprus, and Emma Blake looks at Sardinia's Nuraghi, 4 millennia of becoming. We even have Michael Dietler with The Tale of Three Sites, the monumentalisation of Celtic Oppida and the politics of collective memory and identity, so bringing the story from the Celtic Iron Age up to the present. There's a paper by me on monuments and the past in early Anglo-Saxon England. And complementing that focus on early Anglo-Saxon England, Sarah Semple has a paper on a fear of the past, the place of the prehistoric burial mound and the ideology of middle and later Anglo-Saxon England. Conor Newman's paper takes us to Ireland, with his paper reflecting on the making of a royal site in early Ireland, and Stephen Driscoll's paper takes us to northern Britain with Picts in prehistory, cultural resource management in early medieval Scotland. And finally, we have a multi-authored paper with Felipe Criado Baudo, with Cesar Piquero Urbina and Manuel Santos Esteves, on rewriting landscape, incorporating sacred landscapes into cultural traditions. So we have this range of individual case studies, all from different perspectives, looking at the biography of monuments over time, and also looking at the decision at particular periods in time to redeploy, reactivate ancient sites as focus of ceremony, ritual, and sometimes habitation, and sometimes for the burial of the dead. So check it out. You can actually buy it as a book now, as a separate standalone book, but it's also available, I think, on JSTOR, which is open access at the moment, and also through other collections, Taylor and Francis's journal collection. 1998, that's over 20 years ago, my word, how did that happen? And that book, that collection, I think, stood as an important aspect of my research for the next decade, even though it actually only developed from my master's thesis. My PhD was on cremation practices, so this was a sideline for me, really, and it was a publication I did whilst I was a doctoral researcher, and therefore it was very important for my career, and also set up my work going forward to my 2006 Death and Memory in Early Medieval Britain monograph. But also it sets out my principle of how I've worked ever since, as well as addressing period-specific themes and approaches in archaeology, that I've always tried to work across regions, across periods, to contend with themes and debates that relate to prehistorians, Romanists and scholars of the ancient world, medievalists and modernists, people who study the last 500 years or so. And so in that sense, I've kept with the spirit of this, and been inspired by the other chapters, looking at not only the prehistoric and early historic reuse of earlier sites, but also how our stories and narratives speak to the modern world and are part of our national origin stories and myths too. So I hope this little video at an appropriate site, at Pentre Broughton, a churchyard within a prehistoric enclosure, it is a useful introduction for you to a concept that has been debated and interpreted for over 35-40 years in archaeological research. Instead of our obsession with the origins of sites, we need to look at their biographies, and we need to look at cases and patterns in how sites are reactivated, redeployed, sometimes centuries, sometimes millennia after they were first built. And that's a bit of a game changer. Now, already back at the time of the conference, I remember somebody saying to me, that monument reuse, that's an old chestnut. And that comment has stuck with me. It's amazing how whole areas of research can be seen as done and dusted, and perhaps already out of vogue And 22 years on, I would say that, yes, our perspectives have moved on and we've got new questions, but this theme of social memory and how communities engage with their landscapes and their ancient monuments, I'm afraid is still, I'm not afraid, I think is a very important and ongoing area of active research, and there are still new arguments to be made and new perspectives to be had on this, this multi-period and multi-regional theme.
If you've enjoyed this ArchaeoDeath video, why not check out the ArchaeoDeath blog at howardwilliamsblog.wordpress.com.